The second Global Conference for Media Freedom just wrapped up. The conference was virtual this year, featuring representatives from a number of nonprofit organizations, non-government organizations, and yes, some governments talking about media freedom around the world. The conference, co-hosted by the Canadian government, however, didn't really look at press freedom in Canada all that much. The only head of government to speak, the top-ranking official from any country addressing the conference, was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He spoke about his government's unrelenting commitment to press freedom, but it was almost exclusively focused on other places in the world. Take a look.
Not only is press freedom a cornerstone of democracy, it's a fundamental building block of strong, healthy societies. When journalists can do their jobs, when citizens can get good, reliable information, everyone does better. Now, that's how things should be. But as you all know, all too often, that's not how things are. Today, we see citizens calling for change from Hong Kong to Belarus, only to have the authorities attack the freedom of the press. We see journalists casting light on human rights abuses and on this pandemic. People like Cho Soo-Wu, Lawton, and Maria Ressa, only to face repression and violence. It is never acceptable for a journalist to be attacked for doing their job. It is never acceptable for a reporter to be thrown in jail for interviewing a peaceful protester. And it is never acceptable for anyone, anywhere, to have their freedom of expression denied. A crackdown on the media puts democracy in danger. It puts lives in danger. So when we see it happening, we can't turn away. We can't wait for someone else to act. After all, a free, independent press doesn't happen by itself. It happens because, as citizens, we know it is vital to our shared future, and so we accept nothing less. Le Canada défendra toujours la liberté de presse.
Canada will always defend freedom of the press, as we will defend freedom of expression.
Now, I agree with him when he says when journalists can do their jobs, everyone does better. Unfortunately, it hasn't really been that easy for a journalist to do their job in Justin Trudeau's government. Remember that the Trudeau government has actually banned me and other journalists from covering government events like the Leaders Debates Commission. You have Ezra Levant from our friends over at The Rebel, who is still facing investigation by election bureaucrats for writing a book about Justin Trudeau during an election. We had, of course, Justin Trudeau banning me from covering the Liberal campaign, and at one point I was pulled over, detained at roadside by police while I was trying to go to Justin Trudeau's next campaign stop. Now, the challenges that I face are, of course, different than what journalists in other parts of the world like Hong Kong or Belarus or even parts of Africa face, but they are still falling under that same banner as infringement of press freedom. Now, the Canada and UK governments had actually awarded the Belarusian Association of Journalists an award to deal with, to recognize the tremendous bravery and courage that Belarusian journalists have shown trying to cover things that are going on in an undemocratic country. And the gentleman who accepted the award, speaking through a translator, had actually given this as an example of how Belarusian journalists have their rights taken away.
The authorities did not miss any chance to block news websites either. Since August 9, many of the internet news sites have become inaccessible from Belarus. The country's most popular portal, tut.by, has just been deprived of its media status. Thus, its reporters have lost rights as journalists.
By government redefining what a journalist is, by saying you're no longer media. Well, that's precisely what's happening here. Yeah, the government stands up in Canada and says it supports press freedom, but it doesn't actually have a free and open description and definition of what press means, of what journalism means. And that's a question that Justin Trudeau has never really had to answer for. It's not one I've heard any mainstream media reporters actually ask him. Now, when we learned what Belarusian journalists face, François-Philippe Champagne, the Foreign Affairs Minister in Canada, called it shocking, even though that sort of conduct, when it comes to denying accreditation, happens inside Canada. So what's the point of this conference? Cabo Morwang, Botswana's Minister of Presidential Affairs, Botswana being the other co-host of this conference, spoke at the event as well, and he had said that it's not about infringing on other nations' sovereignty or telling them how to run their affairs.
Distinguished delegates, this coalition and this conference in particular should not be misconstrued as an attempt to dictate to sovereign states how they should run their countries or administer their laws. I believe that I speak for all participating nations and delegates when I say we respect the sovereignty of all nations of the world. Nevertheless, we understand this coalition to be an attempt to raise global awareness about the benefits that can be born from media freedom.
Yes, what the minister said is that this isn't about imposing some sort of Western standard of press freedom, but rather showcasing it and encouraging it and fostering a dialogue that talks about why press freedom is a good thing that governments and states around the world should embrace. Now, I do appreciate his respect for sovereignty, and that's something we don't hear a lot of in international relations these days. But it also asks the question of, if it's not to talk about why other countries should be doing this, what's the point of it? What's the point of having these discussions if the only countries that are coming to the table already have this commitment to media freedom? My response to that would be that it's all the more reason that countries that are talking about these issues need to model the behavior they want to see in the world. And that means for Canada, press freedom should begin at home. Sure, we can all agree that things need to be better in Hong Kong, in Russia, in Belarus, in Brazil, and other parts of the world, but when you aren't prepared to do the introspection to talk about your own country's track record on press freedom, you really aren't standing up for press freedom. And that was a theme at last year's Global Conference for Media Freedom, and it doesn't really seem like much has changed this year. From the Global Conference for Media Freedom, I'm Andrew Lawton. Now, I know I didn't need to fly anywhere to cover this conference, but still, True North is standing up for media freedom and covering these issues, covering the free speech battles in a way the mainstream media is not. If you can chip in a few dollars to support our efforts, it would be very much appreciated. Head on over to tnc.news/donate.